know that one of the most Googled things about Scotch whisky is what is the difference between a single malt and a blended malt? And there are all these other terms that can sound quite confusing. Single grain, blended Scotch, blended grain, single cask, all these terms that just sound a lot more confusing than they are. So don't worry, today I'm going to explain to you the 6 types of Scotch. It's super simple, I promise. And by the end of this video, you're gonna be quite the expert. I'm going to start with my favourite and definitely the category of whiskey that I drink the most, and that is single malt whiskey. The criteria for single malt whiskey is that the whiskey has to be made using a mash of only malted barley. There's no corn, there's no maize, there's no rye, nothing like that, only malted barley and water in the whiskey. You can actually add caramel food colouring to the whiskey, but the mash itself is going to be made only of malted barley. Crucially, the whiskey can only be made using the liquid from one distillery. Don't make the mistake that people make a lot, which is thinking that single malt whiskey can only be from one cask. That is false, completely incorrect. Single malt whiskey can be from more than one cask, but it just has to all be malted barley whiskey and only from one distillery. There are loads of examples. I definitely have a lot on this shelf, and just as I say, that is my most drunk category. Here's one example. This is the Edredale 10. I'm not going to go too much into tasting notes or anything specific, but yeah, here's one that I specifically tend to enjoy, but there are loads, as I say. Now, the second type of whiskey we're going to talk about is the blended malt. People hear the word blend and automatically associate that it must be either cheap and nasty whiskey or just inferior to single malt whiskey. This is where you're wrong. Blended malt whiskey is actually just a mixture of single malt whiskies from more than one distillery. Single malt whiskies have to be from only one distillery. Blended malt whiskies are a mixture of single malt whiskies from multiple distilleries. A good example is something like this. This is a perfectly drinkable, absolutely delicious blended malt. This is called the Speysiders, and it is made using single malts from multiple Speyside distilleries. As you can imagine, it encompasses very signature Speyside style. It's lovely and cherried, nice and sweet, a little bit spicy. We're not going to go too much into that now, but great whiskey anyway. Now this one is slightly different. Let's talk about blended Scotch. Blended Scotch is a mixture of malt whiskies and grain whiskies. It can be from the same distillery, it can be from multiple distilleries, it doesn't matter. Something I've got here is the Hankey Bannister 40-year-old. It's a blended Scotch. Notice I did not say blended malt or blended grain, it's a blended Scotch, which means it contains both malt whiskies and grain whiskies all blended together to create this masterpiece. And let me tell you, this one is a real masterpiece. This Hankey Bannister 40-year-old is an incredible, incredible whiskey. You might have got the gist by now and be able to guess this one on your own. Let's talk about single grain whiskey. A single grain whiskey is a whiskey that is distilled from a mash that is not barley from one single distillery. So they can be grains like wheat, like corn, like rye, anything like that, but crucially it can only be from one distillery. Just like our malt whiskies just from one distillery, single grain whiskies are grain whiskies from just one distillery. It's pretty self-explanatory. I actually don't have one with me right now, which I should do. I'm a little bit ashamed, but I can give you some great recommendations of things I've tried. North British 25-year-old is a fantastic single grain whiskey. I personally love that grain whiskies have this sort of cereally flavour. It's almost like toast, a toast note in the whiskey. It's very distinctive, and unless you've tried it, I can't really explain to you what it's like, but I do recommend that you do try it because it's something different. I personally really like it. Some people don't. Some people really prefer whiskies made from malted barley. I like both. There are great whiskies in each category. There's also a really great Loch Lomond Distiller's Choice single grain whiskey that you should try if you can. Before I tell you what a blended grain whiskey is, see if you can guess. Pause this video, see if you can guess. Once you've decided, press play and I'll tell you the answer. So a blended grain whiskey is a mixture of single grain whiskies from multiple distilleries. I mean, it follows the pattern by now. Single malt whiskies, whiskies made from barley from one distillery, blended malt whiskies, multiple single malt whiskies mixed together, single grain whiskies, grain whiskey from one distillery, single grain whiskies from multiple distilleries. It makes sense. Again, I don't have one here right now to show you, but a great one is the Compass Box Hedonism bottle. That's a really really great dram. And finally, we're going to talk about single cask whiskies. So a whiskey can be both a single malt and a single cask, or a single grain and a single cask. All it means is that this whiskey is not blended with anything. It's simply taken from the cask and put in the bottle. There is not a mixture of whiskies from different casks. Just to show you a bit clearer, this is actually a single cask. It's also a single malt. And this bottle is actually one of Douglas Lang's XOP bottles. It's a Glenallachie 25-year-old. So, did you learn something new? Did you know all these already? I am very curious to hear what your favourite category of Scotch whisky is. I definitely drink single malt the most, but that being said, I do enjoy whiskies from every single one of those categories. So I definitely need to explore them all some more. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up, and of course subscribe to Whisky Raiders if you love whiskey just like me. And I think that's all from me for now, so I will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching, bye!